Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I am by no means an expert or pro at revenge, but I am a patient person. I disclosed this to a friend and they directed me here. Using a throwaway account for obvious reasons, it's a long read, but the setup and backstory are important. 3 years ago, I was lucky enough to be able to buy my own place. I had saved for 8 years, worked my ass off, and I was so happy to be able to have a place to call my own. Now, being a single person on the mortgage meant I had to make compromises. One such compromise was buying a property on a shared block, a lot cheaper. Where I'm from, this usually means it's on a strata title. For some, that's a bonus, as it means there's a communal fund for repairs. Typically, insurance is cheaper as it's collective, and other things like maintenance being taken care of. Strata titles also come with a lot of bylaws and restrictions on what you can and can't do. I'm a pretty private and introverted person, so having to deal with people and have limits on how I live was a no-no. I need my own space without a bunch of rules telling me what I can do with it, I told my realtor, Marcus. That's non-negotiable. Don't worry, he assured me with that practiced smile. I completely understand what you're looking for. I took my time, found the perfect property. Shared block, but freehold title. Only thing was that I needed to pay public liability insurance for the shared walkway on the property, split equally between owners. Marcus was local to my area, and there's also about 3 degrees of separation between us. He has friends who are friends with my friends type of thing. Didn't know him personally, but knew of him, so that sort of felt good too. About 5 months after I moved in, I got a knock on the door from Damien, the owner and landlord of the property next to me, to discuss insurance. Hey, just wanted to touch base about the upcoming strata insurance payment, he said casually. I frowned. Strata? There must be some mistake. This is freehold. Damien looked confused. No, it's definitely strata. Always has been. Not a problem, I thought. There's just confusion. I asked for a copy of the policy so I could have a record. It got sent through, and lo and behold, it was for strata insurance. I was incredibly confused, and after much back and forth, I discovered the property isn't a freehold title, but a strata title. I called my lawyer who had conveyed the title. He was dumbfounded, but overall did the right thing and made things as right as they could. This is clearly an error in how the property was represented to you, my lawyer said. We have grounds to pursue this. I arranged for a meeting with Marcus. I brought emails and printouts of the ads they had, all saying it was freehold, emails between Marcus and my lawyer discussing its freehold status. Despite it being an absolute black and white, he refused to accept any fault or offer anything to make things right. Look, Jen, he said, leaning back in his chair. These things happen. The listing came to me that way. I can't be responsible for every detail. But you specifically told me it was freehold, multiple times. It's in writing, he shrugged. Market conditions change. Property details get mixed up sometimes. I don't begrudge his self-protection. He's looking out for himself, I get that. However, I wouldn't forget it. I did enter into mediation with Marcus, and all I asked for was, when the time came for me to sell, they'd do it or cover the costs. I thought this was reasonable, but they flat out refused, offered me $1,000 to go away, which I refused. That's insulting, I told the mediator. This mistake fundamentally changes my living situation. The mediator nodded sympathetically. You have solid grounds for legal action here. I had the option to pursue them legally, and was advised by the mediator to do so. But ultimately I decided against it for a few reasons, the main one being my health at the time. So I planned and plotted, and I schemed and connived as to how to get back at this son of a bitch, and I settled on this. I found his personal Facebook page, which wasn't set to private, saw some photos of a boys on tour trip he went on a few weeks prior, so about 5-6 months after I bought the property. I also found his address through a business registration search. On the anniversary of the sale, for 3 years straight, I sent him flowers with a note. Dear Marcus, remembering you on this, our special day. She has your eyes. Love, L. They varied ever so slightly over the years, but always had on this our special day, and some weird inference to a love child and a desire to reconnect. I also from time to time arranged for postcards and letters to be sent from another country, the one he was on tour in, always signed Love L. The first time I sent flowers, I imagined his face turning pale as he read the card. Would his wife be there? Would he have to explain? The thought made me smile. I learned about 3 weeks ago that Marcus had recently divorced, lost his home, and is no longer working as a real estate agent. His wife, Vanessa, had found out he cheated on her. The story I was told, through said friends of friends, went along the lines of, he would get weird gifts and flowers every year, same day every year. Vanessa finally put 2 and 2 together and realized what the date was, and he admitted to cheating on her. My friend Rachel filled me in on the gossip. It's wild, Jen. Apparently Vanessa finally confronted him after this year's flowers arrived and the whole thing unraveled from there. Now, I didn't mean for this, but it turns out a year before I bought my house, Marcus had gone on holiday, came back with an STD, gave it to Vanessa, but somehow convinced her that it wasn't him. As such, our special day turned out to be right around the time he'd have been unfaithful to his wife only 1 year earlier. He's apparently lost his house, half his retirement savings, and also his business. I do feel a little bit guilty about all of it sometimes, but then I'm reminded that he's a scumbag and that karma, like me, is a patient, spiteful, and vengeful bitch. Do you regret it? Rachel asked me over coffee last week. I thought for a moment before answering. I regret that his life fell apart so completely. But I don't regret that he finally faced consequences for his actions. In business and in his marriage, he made choices that hurt people. I just gave those chickens a place to roost. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about a year ago, and I'm still amazed at how stupid some people can be when they get a little bit of power. I own a house that sits on about 3 acres of land that I inherited from my grandfather. The property has been in my family for decades, long before any of the surrounding developments were built. My house sits right at the edge of what's now a fancy planned community called Riverside Estates, but I'm not part of their HOA, and never have been. The property line is clearly marked with a fence that my grandfather put up years ago, and my house sits about 50 feet back from that fence line. I've got a decent-sized in-ground pool in my backyard that was installed maybe 15 years ago. Nothing fancy, just a standard rectangular pool with some basic landscaping around it. The pool area is completely on my property and visible from the street that runs along the edge of the development, but that's never been an issue before. The trouble started when this guy moved in next door on the other side of the fence. His house is definitely part of Riverside Estates, and he's subject to all their HOA rules and restrictions. This guy, who I later learned was actually the HOA president, seemed to think that his authority extended beyond the development boundaries. I should have seen the red flags early on, but I'm not really a confrontational person, and I figured we could just be normal neighbors. The first incident happened on a Saturday morning when I was doing some maintenance on my pool. I was skimming leaves and checking the chemical levels, just normal pool owner stuff. This guy comes walking over to the fence and starts telling me that pools in the neighborhood need to have certain safety features, and that mine doesn't meet the community standards. I politely explained that I'm not part of his HOA, and that my pool meets all county requirements, which is all that matters for my property. He didn't like that answer. He started going on about property values and community standards and how everyone in the area needs to follow the same rules to maintain the neighborhood's appeal. I tried to be reasonable and explained again that I'm not part of his development and that my property predates his HOA by decades. He walked away after that, but I could tell he wasn't happy about it. Over the next few weeks, he kept finding reasons to come over and complain about different things. First it was the pool, then it was my lawn maintenance schedule, then it was the fact that I sometimes had friends over for barbecues. Each time, I politely reminded him that I'm not subject to his HOA rules, and each time he seemed to get more frustrated. The situation escalated when I decided to install some new pool lighting. I hired a licensed electrician and got all the proper permits from the county. Everything was completely legal and up to code. But this guy saw the work being done and absolutely lost his mind. He came storming over while the electrician was still working and demanded to see the HOA approval forms for the electrical work. I told him for what felt like the 100th time that I don't need HOA approval for anything because I'm not in his HOA. The electrician actually backed me up and showed him the county permits, explaining that this was all perfectly legal work. That's when this guy really showed his true colors. He started yelling about how I was being disrespectful to the community and that there would be consequences for my actions. Things got really weird after that. He started taking pictures of my property from his side of the fence. I'd catch him out there with his phone, documenting everything from my pool maintenance to when I had guests over. He was clearly building some kind of case against me, though I couldn't figure out what he thought he was going to accomplish. The breaking point came on a hot Sunday afternoon in the summer. I was having a small pool party with maybe 8 friends and family members. Nothing crazy, just people swimming and grilling some burgers. We were being respectful of noise levels and everyone was having a good time. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed the HOA president standing at his back door, staring at our gathering and talking on his phone. About 20 minutes later, 2 police cars pulled up to my house. I was completely confused and went out front to talk to the officers. They explained that they'd received a complaint about an unpermitted gathering at a residential pool that was allegedly violating HOA regulations. They seemed a bit confused about the details themselves, but they had to respond to the call. I invited the officers into my backyard and explained the whole situation. I showed them my property deed, the county permits for my pool, and explained that I've never been part of any HOA. The officers could see that everything was legitimate and that we weren't doing anything wrong. One of them even commented that it seemed like a neighbor dispute that had gotten out of hand. But then the HOA president came over to clarify things for the police. This is where things got really interesting. He started making all these claims about community pool regulations and safety violations. He insisted that any pool gathering in the neighborhood required HOA approval and that I was in violation of multiple community standards. The officers listened to his whole speech and then asked him for documentation showing that my property was subject to his HOA's jurisdiction. He couldn't provide any, of course, because there isn't any. When they asked him to show them where exactly these violations were occurring, he pointed to my pool and my guests. That's when one of the officers asked him directly if he was claiming that I needed permission from his HOA to use my own pool on my own property. He said yes, absolutely. That's exactly what he was claiming. He went on to demand that the officers either shut down my gathering immediately or issue citations for the various violations he was claiming. This is where the malicious compliance part comes in. The officer looked at me and said that while they couldn't force me to do anything since I wasn't actually violating any laws, they had to ask if I would be willing to comply with the complainant's demands just to keep the peace in the neighborhood. The HOA president was standing right there, nodding along, clearly thinking he was about to get his way. I thought about it for a moment and then said, sure, I'd be happy to comply with his demands about pool usage and HOA regulations. The HOA president got this smug look on his face like he'd finally won. But then I asked the officer to clarify exactly what the complainant was demanding, just so I could make sure I was in full compliance. The officer looked at his notes and said that according to the complaint, I was allegedly violating HOA pool regulations by using my pool without proper authorization, hosting gatherings without approval, and failing to follow community safety standards. The HOA president jumped in and said that's exactly right and that I needed to shut everything down immediately and apply for proper approvals before using my pool again. So I said, okay, no problem. If those are the rules that apply in this neighborhood, then I'll make sure to follow them completely. I asked the HOA president to provide me with a copy of all the relevant regulations so I could ensure full compliance going forward. He said he'd email them to me that evening. The officers left, my guests went home, and I spent the rest of the day researching HOA law and property rights. By the time the HOA president sent me his email with all the pool regulations, I had a pretty good understanding of how this was going to play out. The email was exactly what I expected. Pages and pages of restrictions about pool usage, gathering sizes, noise levels, maintenance schedules, safety equipment requirements, and approval processes for any pool-related activities. Some of these rules were incredibly detailed and restrictive. For example, any pool gathering with more than 4 people required written approval submitted at least 2 weeks in advance. Pool maintenance could only be done on specific days and times. Any pool lighting had to be approved by an architectural review committee. Here's the thing though, all of these regulations only applied to properties within the Riverside Estates HOA. And since I wasn't part of that HOA, none of these rules actually applied to me. But the HOA president had specifically demanded that I follow these regulations, and I had agreed to comply in front of the police officers. So I decided to take him at his word and follow his HOA regulations exactly as written. I submitted a formal application to use my pool, following every single requirement in his rulebook. I filled out all the forms, provided detailed plans for any pool-related activities, and submitted everything through the proper channels. The first application I submitted was for basic pool maintenance. According to the regulations, any chemical treatment or cleaning of pools required prior approval from the HOA maintenance committee. I submitted a detailed schedule of when I planned to skim leaves, vacuum the pool bottom, and adjust chemical levels. I included the specific products I planned to use and requested approval for the next 6 months of routine maintenance. The second application was for my weekly swimming sessions. The regulations stated that any regular use of pools by property owners required a usage schedule to be submitted and approved. I requested approval to swim in my own pool for 1 hour every morning and 2 hours every evening, 7 days a week. The third application was for emergency pool usage. The regulations had a provision for urgent pool-related activities that couldn't wait for the normal approval process, but these required special emergency permits. I submitted a request for a blanket emergency permit that would allow me to use my pool immediately in case of any urgent situations, like if my house caught fire and I needed to use the pool water for firefighting. I submitted all of these applications with the required fees, which according to the regulations totaled about $800 for the various review processes and administrative costs. I made sure to follow every single requirement exactly as written, including using certified mail for all submissions and providing multiple copies of every document. The response from the HOA was immediate and predictable. They sent back a letter explaining that these regulations only applied to properties within their development and that they had no authority over my property. They included a refund check for my fees and a polite suggestion that I disregard their previous communications. But I wasn't done yet. Since the HOA president had specifically demanded that I follow these regulations, and since I had publicly agreed to comply with his demands, I felt obligated to continue following his rules exactly as written. When they rejected my applications, I submitted appeals following the process outlined in their regulations. The appeals process was even more detailed than the original applications. I had to provide written justifications for why I believed my pool usage was appropriate, include statements from neighbors supporting my applications, and pay additional fees for the review process. I also had to appear at a hearing to present my case to the HOA board. This is where things got really interesting. The hearing was held at the community center in Riverside Estates, and I showed up with a folder full of documents and a prepared presentation. The HOA board members looked confused when I walked in, and the president looked like he was having some kind of medical emergency. I presented my case exactly as if I were a homeowner in their development who was genuinely seeking approval for pool usage. I explained that I had been directed by their president to follow all HOA regulations and that I was simply trying to comply with those requirements. I pointed out that I had followed every single rule and procedure exactly as written, and that I deserved fair consideration of my applications. The board members were obviously uncomfortable with the whole situation. They kept looking at their president, who was turning redder by the minute. Finally, one of the board members asked me directly why I was applying for approvals when I wasn't actually part of their HOA. I explained the whole situation, including how their president had called the police and demanded that I follow HOA regulations for my pool usage. I mentioned that I had agreed to comply with his demands in front of the officers and that I was simply trying to be a good neighbor by following through on that agreement. The room got very quiet after that. The board members started asking their president some pointed questions about why he had been involving the police in matters outside of their jurisdiction. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he had overstepped his authority, and the other board members were getting tired of dealing with the legal and insurance issues his actions were creating. The hearing ended with the board formally rejecting all of my applications and issuing a written statement that their regulations did not apply to my property. They also issued a formal censure of their president for exceeding his authority and potentially exposing the HOA to legal liability. But I still wasn't satisfied. The HOA president had demanded compliance with his regulations, and I was determined to give him exactly what he had asked for. Since the board had rejected my applications, I submitted complaints about their decision-making process following their internal dispute resolution procedures. The complaints process required them to hire an independent mediator to review the situation and make recommendations for resolution. This cost the HOA several $1,000s and resulted in a formal review of their president's actions over the previous year. The mediator's report was extremely critical of the president's behavior and recommended his immediate removal from office. The situation finally reached a resolution when the HOA board voted to remove their president and issued a formal apology to me for his inappropriate actions. They also implemented new policies to prevent board members from taking actions outside of their jurisdiction. The former president tried to save face by claiming that he had been trying to protect property values and maintain community standards. But the damage was done. The other homeowners in his development were furious about the legal fees and administrative costs his actions had generated. Several of them started questioning other decisions he had made during his time in office. The final twist came a few months later when the former president put his house up for sale. Apparently, the stress of the situation and the hostility from his neighbors had made his position in the community untenable. The house sat on the market for almost 6 months before finally selling for significantly less than the asking price. As for me, I continued using my pool exactly as I always had, without any interference from anyone. The new HOA leadership made it clear that they had no interest in extending their authority beyond their actual jurisdiction. I even got a nice fruit basket from them as an apology for all the trouble their former president had caused. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to give them exactly what they're asking for. The former HOA president had demanded that I follow his regulations, and I had complied with his demands in the most thorough and complete way possible. He just hadn't thought through what the consequences of those demands would be. Looking back, I probably could have handled the situation differently and saved everyone a lot of time and trouble. But there was something satisfying about watching someone who had abused their authority face the natural consequences of their actions. The whole thing cost him his position, his reputation in the community, and eventually his house, all because he couldn't accept that his power had limits. I still live in the same house and still use my pool whenever I want to. The fence between my property and the development is still exactly where it always was, marking the clear boundary between my land and theirs. Sometimes I see the new neighbors on the other side of the fence and they always wave and smile. They seem to understand something their predecessor never figured out, that being a good neighbor doesn't require having authority over your neighbors. The next one is a petty revenge story. I'm not sure if this scenario would fall under petty revenge or malicious compliance, so I'll post it here. This happened a couple years ago when I first moved into our apartment community. To set the scene, there are a ridiculously low amount of guest parking spots available. On the side that I'm on, there are 3 apartment buildings with 24 apartments each, so 72 units total. There are 3 parking stalls available marked for guests. 3, 1 for each building. There is street parking available as well. Anyways, one day I get home from work and I find that someone is parked in my parking stall. I was pretty pissed. Thankfully, our leasing office is very encouraging of tenants calling and utilizing the towing company. In fact, in our leasing package given to us when we moved in, had the towing company phone number, and we get emails encouraging us to use them if someone is in our spot, so that is exactly what I did. So, after a while, I decided to go out to see if I got my parking spot back. Indeed, I did. However, when I went outside, there was also a group of 3 women, grandma, mom, and daughter, looking around with great concern. The daughter was freaking out, saying, "Oh crap, where's my car? Where's my car? I have to be at work in an hour." When they saw me, one of them asked, "Do you know the number of the towing company?" I said that I did not and wished them luck. I checked my mailbox for mail and went back inside with a strange satisfaction. Later, I parked my car back in my stall. Moral of the story is, FAFO. Play stupid games, get stupid prizes, and all of that. The next one is a malicious compliance story. My partner and I own a small 8-person company that shares a building with only a daycare. Our company consists almost exclusively of higher-level professionals, a couple lawyers, CPAs, etc. So most have their own large office plus, a couple of common areas, conference rooms, a nice kitchen. All in all, it's about 3,500 SKSAT, which is obviously a lot for 8 people, but necessary for our line of work. Due to the size of the office, the lease has a parking provision which grants us exclusive rights to all 24 parking spots. This is somewhat important. To the story Not Our Work, we only need 8+ clients. Also, important is the daycare's parking lot, only consisting of about 10 spots in front of the building. The parents would use our lot to drop off, as the daycare's lot would be mostly full with their staff's cars, and even some of their staff would park in our lot. I didn't mind at all. We had over a dozen empty spots each day, and it was nice to have the mostly happy children around in the mornings and afternoon, until a month ago. I started coming in a bit later at the same time as daycare drop-off. Our lot was crazy with parents, kids, walking, and parking, so I used their lot like they have done with ours for years. First day, no issue. Second day, the manager saw me get out and gave me a piercing stare. A week later or so, I did it again, and my car was towed. Not a warning or word from the manager, anyone at the daycare to me, or our office. I went to the daycare to ask if they knew it was my car. It is a very distinctive old blue truck, and if some kind of mistake had been made. The manager came out and said it was not a mistake, and in a very rude, demeaning tone, her exact words were along the lines of, "Unfortunately, we can't have the liability of non-staff and parents within our lot, and I'm sure the parents don't appreciate having to walk further either, or an unknown adult like you in the lot." She looks me up and down, and I am a totally normal-looking 30-year-old male. I think at least. "Don't you have some reserved spots in the back? You should really park there and let us park here." With an eye roll, she walked off. I was happy I held my tongue in front of the children, considering how ducking angry I was, knowing it was not the time for that conversation. A couple days later, I told the manager while we were outside the office that I wished she would have come to me before towing my car and costing me $600, asked for an apology, and said since we share the back lot and the parents take up almost all of our spots in the morning and afternoon, can I park in the front lot the occasional morning the timelines align? She flatly said no, and basically gave me the same speech she gave last time. At least not commenting on my appearance this time. I left things for a week, thinking it was over, until again I had nowhere to park one morning, having to wait 10 minutes for parents to filter out of our lot lest my car be towed. And who do I see but the manager getting a spot in my lot before me even? I decided to comply with the manager's wishes then and developed a plan. I contacted the building owner and said, or more accurately lied, that due to compliance reasons with a state license we're applying for, we need to have a gate installed with employee guest pass access only on our parking lot. Our company would of course cover the cost. Same day approval from landlord, installed 2 weeks later. I drove in early that first day after install. I tell you, the mayhem was well worth it. Watching from the corner window gave me a perfect view of it all. It started with daycare staff pressing all sorts of keys on the gate to try and get in, trying to park where they have for months, years even. Then their lot filled up completely. Parents started arriving. A staff member had to stand at the gate telling parents there was now no access. Their parking lot was basically congested with parents double parked taking their children in. Other parents parked a quarter-mile down in another lot at the park our office overlooks. I eventually went down to give the manager a nice little wave and walked back up to my office. She gave me a piercing stare that just made me grin ear to ear. I guess she sent the owner a rather angry email about parking rights to the backlot afterwards and how it's crazy one small office gets the entire thing. Apparently she did not know we had all of it. He said him and I may have to discuss the parking provision in the future, and he also did not know the lease gave the entire backlot, but it's not a big deal to him. Not sure why he let me put the gate in. Regardless, I still have 2 years left on my lease with another option to extend an additional 5, so no plans on moving anytime soon from the office or my 24 parking spots. P.S. It's an office building next to a park and residential homes. I'm in no way endangering these children since they now walk through a quarter-mile of grass and playground to get to daycare. There's not even a street to cross from that lot. If anything, I made the days of the employees and parents better in retrospect. Actually not sure employees can park in the playground lot for that long. Edit. Finally figured out how to edit. Newer around these parts. To everyone asking me why I did not tow, 2 reasons. 1. Most importantly, I was tired and working 12-plus hour days for a few months at that point. That day she parked there was the last or second to last day of that stretch, and then I'm basically 6 hours a day for 9 months. Towing a car was the last thing on my mind. Getting into the office and finishing my work was my only goal. Then my partner suggested it when I recounted the story. 2. $600 can be a lot of money for some. I grew up fairly poor and know how devastating a towed car can mean to a family struggling month to month. Another day I may have done it. I'm glad I didn't. The next one is an entitled people story. Being a CEO can be quite rewarding. Do not let the word CEO fool you. I am not a rich CEO who runs a corporate company. I run a small family business that has 2 separate locations. My parents run the original location that they started 20-plus years ago, and my brother and I manage the second location that we were able to open about 5 years ago. We are a small bookstore that offers an exchange program. We ended up getting a lot of our inventory for free because when customers donate books to us, we allow them to receive credit towards their entire purchase. It's like a store credit program. Anyway, that is not really the point of the story, but I have been an avid reader ever since childhood, so I am passionate about what I do. When I was about 10 years old, my family and I were in a car crash that left me paralyzed from the waist down. Because of this, I am in a wheelchair. I can do everything I need to do in the store. I can stock the shelves I can reach, talk to customers, check them out, and organize all the books. Sure, I must do things in a different way than my brother or our few employees, but I am still efficient and productive. Definitely not lazy. Well, that's not what Karen had to say a few weeks ago. I could tell from the get-go that Karen would be a problem. She walked in so snobby. But sometimes I can be wrong, so obviously I was going to help her regardless. However, that did not go so well. Me. Hey there, welcome to our bookstore. Is this your first time here? Karen. Actually, it is, and it will be the last since the employees here like to fake disabilities. Me. I am sorry? Karen. You dumbass! Who do you think you are pretending to be disabled so that you can sit in your chair all day long? Me. Ma'am, no one here is pretending to be anything. I am paralyzed from the... Karen. Oh, shut up! You are too young to be sitting your ass in a chair? At this point, I was completely baffled. I've had a lot of different reactions to me being in a wheelchair, but never anything like this, and certainly never something so aggressive. If anything, most people are simply curious. They like to be nosy and ask questions, which after a certain amount of time I got used to it. I was left completely speechless. But what happened next left me even more speechless. Karen then proceeds to walk up to me, grabs the handles on my chair, and pushes my chair forward so that I fall out of it. It all happened so fast. I did not even have time to try and stop it or even process what was going on. At this point, one of our employees and my brother heard the commotion and came up from the basement. This is where we did a lot of book sorting to see what was going on. My brother, what the hell? Bro, are you okay? Employee, oh my gosh, what happened? Karen, you have lazy workers, that is what happened. My brother, he is paralyzed. You cannot just do that. My brother starts helping me up out of my chair, and the look on Karen's face is priceless. You can tell that she knows what she had just done was wrong, but she was not going to admit it. In fact, she kept the whole spiel going. Karen, I want to speak to the manager. My brother, yes, well, you just assaulted one of them. Get the hell out of here, lady, before I call the police. Karen, go ahead. I want the police officers to know you are phony and pretend to be disabled to get out of work. My brother gives a look at our employee, and she knows right away he is telling her to call the police officer. My brother tries to de-escalate the situation while our employee is on the phone, but Karen just kept getting crazier and crazier. Luckily, the police arrived quickly, and we were able to tell them the entire situation that had just happened. Karen, of course, tries telling the police that she should have been the one calling the police to report someone faking a disability, but the police were not buying it. My brother, listen, I am telling you this is a family business, and my brother and I run this store. Why would we jeopardize that and fake a disability? Karen, yeah, right. I am not leaving until I talk to the real manager or owner. At this point, we are exhausted dealing with her, and we even tell the police that they can check our security camera to verify that she really did push me out of my chair. I made the point to the police that even if she did think I was faking a disability, what gives her the right to push me out of my chair like that and put her hands on me? Well, the police officers agreed with that logic. My brother and I told the police that we wanted her out of there, and that if she did not leave, then we wanted to charge her with trespassing. Of course, Karen starts freaking out, but even then, she surprises us by throwing herself on the floor and kicking and screaming like a child. I was so shocked. Just when I thought it could not get any worse, it does. Luckily, the police are able to remove Karen from the property, and we were able to file a restraining order so that she is not allowed to come back. Like I said, I was used to people questioning my wheelchair or asking me about being paralyzed. I have never experienced anything like that, even until this day. That was the only time someone has ever gotten physical with me. It is sad that people are so ignorant or uneducated that they assume people like me are lazy or just faking it. I have been through a lot and been through even more learning to navigate a life of paralysis. I hope that one day people will not make assumptions about disabled people because we are capable of anything just like everyone else. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Quick backstory to keep it from being too boring. I had recently lost my job, like most people at the time, and was having to do odd jobs on Craigslist just to get by. I recruited a friend to help me with various odd jobs since he was in a similar situation. We pooled our resources and cobbled together enough equipment to do landscaping work, along with other manual labor jobs. We were both young, in our early 20s, and didn't really know when we were being scammed or fooled. We got a call from one of our ads to do some landscaping work for a guy who happened to live about a mile away. Awesome! We wouldn't have to spend much on gas, but we would have to sacrifice our Labor Day weekend to do the job since it was a large one. The guy asked us to put in a raised bed that essentially wrapped around his entire house. Imagine a house in a newly built subdivision with a smallish yard and a few trees. He wanted the bed to be built with landscaping bricks, and wanted us to replicate a style that his neighbor had done. Cool, no problem. We tried to discuss payment, but he kept giving us the runaround. Due to our desperate situation, we were fooled into doing the work without agreeing upon a labor fee. This was our mistake, one that was never repeated. We were just happy to have some work. We spent 2 full days working our asses off in the middle of summer without really knowing what we would get paid. We used our tools, truck, and time grinding away, but we kept wondering why this guy was acting so shady. Finally, on day 3, near the end of the day, I had had enough of the runaround, so I knocked on the door and confronted the guy about payment. He started getting aggressive and threatening us with non-payment, which immediately escalated the situation. I grabbed my friend and brought him into the argument. After about 30 minutes of arguing, the guy decided he would pay us $70 for the work. Yeah, $70 to split between us after 3 days of labor. Cool, screw us, right? We loaded up our truck with the tools and waited for the guy to come out with our cash. This person came out with a huge wad of cash but proceeded to only hand over $70. Jerk. We collected our money and grabbed our last item, a tarp. We had been using a really large tarp to put weeds, grass, and extra dirt on to make our lives easier since we didn't have a wheelbarrow at the time. The accumulated mound on this thing had to have been 4 feet high. We dragged it into the middle of his front yard and dumped the tarp. This was the first duck you. He was begging us not to do it, but he could eat a dick at this point. We loaded up and sped off, because, angry youngsters. Now for the pro-revenge part. My friend's mom was a professional landscaper. She heard our story and offered some excellent revenge advice. Take the backpack sprayers we had, fill them with a warm saltwater mix, then ride over and spray his yard. We planned to do this about 2 months later. When the time came, we executed the plan late at night, around 2 a.m. We parked down at the pool parking lot, walked down to his house, and absolutely drenched this guy's yard. We came back about a month later and everything was dead or dying. Flowers, grass, small trees, everything. Mess with the guys who are doing your yard work? Screw your yard. The next one is a petty revenge story. Many years ago, I worked for an organization providing frontline customer service. It was a decent place to work, but our manager had lots of rules. One of the rules was that we could not do any personal printing with the printers at work. If we did, we were expected to pay 50 cents per page for black and white printing and $1 per page for color. I'm not sure who made this rule, but the manager was constantly reminding us. Our desks were not assigned, meaning any day you could be sitting at any desk, depending on your assigned tasks for the day. One day, I was interviewing for another job within the organization, but at another location. Prior to the interview, the manager of the other location asked me if I'd mind printing a copy of my resume and bringing it with me, as their printers were down for the day. I said no problem, and figured I'd print it at work since it was work-related. I was sitting at a desk that did not have a printer. The closest printer was located between my manager's desk and an employee's desk, so I printed it and stood up to go get it. Before I could go to the printer, my manager got there first. My print job went ahead of hers. When she saw what I had printed, she said, "OP, this looks like a personal print job." I explained it wasn't, but she disagreed and said since it had nothing to do with our day-to-day work, I had to pay $2 for 4 black and white pages. I begrudgingly paid up. I asked her what happened to the money, and she said she always put it in the Christmas party fund. All right. A few weeks later, I was sitting at the desk with the printer. It was lunchtime, and everyone except my manager agreed to go to a nearby restaurant for lunch. I had walked out of our building and realized I forgot my wallet, so I quickly ran back in to get it. When I got to my desk, I could hear the printer going. I was curious about what was being printed as it was spitting out page after page. I quickly glanced at the pile and saw at least 100 pages printed in color, announcing a Sweet 16 for Trista, our manager's daughter. It very obviously belonged to my manager. My manager came out of the bathroom a moment later and seemed shocked to see me standing there. I picked up the pile and passed it to her, telling her that our Christmas party fund was going to get a big boost. She said nothing but looked really uncomfortable. A few weeks later, our district manager made his quarterly visit. He talked about the upcoming Christmas party and how excited he was for it. I decided it was time for some petty revenge. I raised my hand and said, "Just wondering how much we've accumulated this year for the Christmas party from print jobs." He looked so confused and asked me to explain what I meant. So I told him about our manager's rule. He got really quiet and said he'd have to review this. The next day, my manager sent an email saying the printing rule was something she was misinformed about and would be abolished immediately. Me, being the little crap disturber I am, hit reply all and asked what would happen to the already accumulated funds. Someone else said we should have a nice healthy fund for a pizza lunch, and everyone agreed. The next day, I heard my manager ordering 10 pizzas for lunch. She also used her own personal credit card to pay for it all. Do I think she was pocketing the printing money all along? Absolutely. But it was fun making her sweat, and then having her spend nearly $300 the next day to make up for it. The next one is an entitled people story. I live in a second-floor apartment with my 2 teenagers and 2 cats. An old couple, 75 plus, live below us. The apartments are poorly maintained and not very well insulated. We can hear their TV, hear them talking, hear when she screams at him, when their 6-year-old spoiled brat grandson comes and throws tantrums, and whenever they open and close their door. Apparently, they have been continually complaining to the landlord about us being very loud. They continually bang on their ceiling when we drop something or close the bathroom door, which sticks. Or heaven forbid I get up at night for any reason. She screamed up the heating vent at me one night when I knocked my water glass off my bedside table. They shout when we walk up the stairs. They have also complained that we use too much water when we shower, which is 100% none of their business. Yes, my cats do run around a bit, but we keep them occupied. take them for walks, and they are pretty mellow as middle-aged cats tend to be. We do not listen to loud TV. The kids listen to music on their headphones. We don't jump or stomp or throw parties. It all came down to the other night around 10:30 p.m. when my son was up late making food and one of the cats decided it was playtime. Maybe ran around for 3 minutes while my son caught him. Bang, bang, bang on the ceiling. The cat goes into my daughter's room and promptly goes to sleep. The old man comes running up the stairs and bangs on the door. I don't answer because I'm in bed and the cat is put away. Next thing you know, they called the police with a noise complaint. A noise complaint for the cat and my son using the microwave. The police show up, the house is dark, I'm in pajamas, and the cats are asleep in the bedroom. They look at me and say, "You're in bed?" Me, "Yes." Them. And what was happening? Me, "My son was making food and the cat was running around." Them. "Well, cats and teenagers do that. Is that why they called us?" Me, "Yes." The cop then looks at his partner with a "what the hell" look on his face and says, "Jesus Christ, what a waste of time." Then he asked me if I wanted to file a complaint for harassment. The next day, the old lady shouts across the parking spots, "We are entitled to silence whenever we want silence. You are obnoxious and rude, and I'm going to get you kicked out of here." The landlord calls and is pissed. He says they have been continually complaining about how loud we are and it's ruining their quality of life, and we need to keep it down. So I told him what they were complaining about and that I am moving out in 60 days. If they call again, I will make a complaint of harassment because this is stupid. His response, "Okay, no problem." Note that 95% of their complaints have to do with regular daytime living noise. Occasionally something happens after 10, but rarely. Are they somehow entitled to silence at all times? In a shoddy first-floor apartment? Ha ha ha, right. I hope whoever moves in after I leave has small kids and plays loud pop music and does exercise videos in the living room. The next one is an entitled parent story. This has nothing to do with me personally. A close friend of mine, who we'll call Jake, asked me to write his story here as he is pretty crap with words and doesn't know how to put his feelings down. He has autism, which wasn't diagnosed until he was already an adult, and moved out of his mother's place and went no contact. His mother, who I'll call Wacky Wanda, WW for short, has always treated Jake like a baby, from the time he was born, up until he went no contact with her. He tells me that as far back that he can remember, she would make him wear bibs at the dinner table and always hand-feed him. She claimed it was because he was a special child that needed the extra help. His father, Frank, would always chastise WW for this, saying that he would never grow up if she kept babying him. She would get pissed and tell him that he was being ridiculous and that she loved her baby boy so much. Way too much, if you ask me. Jake began to believe that he was developmentally challenged because of her. W would show up at his school and throw a fit when the teachers wouldn't pull Jake out of class to see her. He began to deal with bullying from other kids who would call him a mama's boy and tease him about wanting his mommy all of the time. As Jake got older, he started fighting back against the bullying. Eventually, he started yelling at his WW whenever she would show up and tell her to go home and to leave him alone. This never went over well, and he tells me she would sit alone in her room and pout, crying about how he had hurt her feelings. He would always apologize, and she would coo at him and pinch his cheeks and say that she couldn't stay mad at him because he was her baby boy, and he was all she had in life, completely forgetting she had a husband, by the way, so ducking manipulative. Once Jake was a teenager, Jake started acting out and becoming more independent from WW. I don't know if everyone knows this, but not all autistic people are built the same. Jake is a very good-looking guy. He is one of those too pretty to look at type of guys. He started rebelling by getting his dad to let him get tattoos. He started smoking cigarettes and pot and began hanging out with the goth, morbid crowd in high school. He listened to heavy metal music and wearing a leather jacket, eyeliner, and black nail polish. His black hair was always cropped short and he smoothed it back with gel. And from the pictures I saw, woo-wee. Even I said if I had seen that walking by me, I would be turning my head to check him out. That gave him an ego boost. Not to mention he is very good looking, even without the makeup. WW hated Jake's style and said it made him look like a clown, and that his beautiful skin was too precious to destroy with tattoos and makeup. She threw his clothes away more than once, replacing them with clothes that she approved of. Frank would always take him to the mall so he could buy new ones, and Jake took pleasure out of throwing out the clothes WW gave him. She would still make them eat dinner at the table every night. She was one of those women that was very traditional about family dinner. They always sat down, and she put a bib on Jake and hand-fed him his meal until he was finished. She would even spit on a napkin and wipe his face if he got anything on it. Jake noticed that whenever she did this, she would side-eye Frank with a smirk, like she wanted him to be jealous or something. Weird. The last time they ate together as a family, as soon as Jake sat down, she pulled out the bib. He tried to ask her not to do this as he was 16 and fully capable of feeding himself. She chastised him and told him to do as he was told. The bibs were too small and wouldn't even fit around his neck. He tried to tell her this, but she would just sit it on his chest, then start hand-feeding him by making plain noises. Jake tore the bib off and told her enough was enough. He was 16 years old and didn't need to be fed like a baby. You got upset and started whining. Frank suddenly blew up and told her to stop her crap because this was getting too creepy, even for him to tolerate. He tried to support her in the dread that her son was getting older and no longer needed her, but this was too much to take. Jake went to his room and didn't come out for the rest of the night. DW pouted and cried for more than a day in hopes of making Jake apologize for refusing her, but he refused. She realized she was losing the battle with keeping her son a baby forever. Time to amp up the crazy. Jake came home from school the next day and found WW in the kitchen, dressed up in all black eyeliner and lipstick, and she even dyed her hair black. She had spiked bracelets and a choker. She looked ridiculous. How I wish I could have seen a picture of this because it sounded hilarious. Jake was shocked and asked her just what the duck she was doing. He noticed the shirt she was wearing was cut way too low, and he could see way more cleavage than he was comfortable with. She bounded over to him and asked him if he liked it. He was too shocked to respond with what he wanted to say and said, "Sure." He tells me that she would push out her breasts toward him in an effort to make him look. For months after that, that was all WW would dress like. She would openly brag to her friends that Jake copied her style and she was so proud of him. She used to wear turtlenecks and mom jeans with slip-on shoes. She was the farthest thing from goth punk you can imagine. One night Jake was asleep. She climbed into bed with him and tried to cuddle with him. He woke up and felt someone touching him inappropriately. He turned around and saw WW. He freaked out and told her to get the duck out of his room. She pouted and cried until Jake went to leave. He noticed his door was locked and he had to unlock it to get out. He had to lock himself in the bathroom and she sat outside the door begging him to come sleep with her. Jake shouted at her that she was touching him inappropriately and that it wasn't okay. And it was weird she did this with the door locked. She screamed that that was how mommies show their love until Frank came out of their room to yell at her for the way she was acting, and that it was creepy for a mother to want to cuddle her 16-year-old son with the door locked. She screamed that he didn't understand the bond she and Jake had, and that he was jealous. Jake screamed that they had no bond. DW cried, and Frank shouted at her to move away from the door, or he would do something he might regret later. He took Jake, and they went to sleep at a motel for the night. Jake told his dad everything that happened. Frank finally had enough. He couldn't stand the weird and creepy behavior from WW anymore. He filed for divorce and got custody of Jake, and WW was given visitation rights. She was mandated to attend parenting classes and therapy, and she actually went, under the threat of losing any and all rights to her son, of course, but she staunchly refused to believe she had ever done anything wrong. Jake dreaded visitation, but as he was still a minor, he had no choice in the matter. He would go and make sure to lock his door to prevent her from coming in. She did give him space when he was at her house, for a while. When Jake was 17, his dad paid for him to enroll in driver's ed and got him a car. This went over like a fart in church because WW got pissed when Jake pulled up to her house in a brand spanking new car. She lost it and called up Frank to scream at him about how she was endangering her baby boy. He hung up on her. Things got worse once Jake started seeing a girl at school. She was a pretty blonde girl that dressed in similar fashion to Jake. When WW found out, she went insane. Jake was in his room sleeping and WW picked the lock. It was one of those push-in locks that a bobby pin can easily pick. What Jake told me next made my heart drop. She undressed herself and climbed into bed with him and began essaying him. He woke up and freaked out. He ran away from the house and drove back to his dad's in tears, and they called the police. You got arrested and imprisoned for 11 years. Jake became severely depressed and tried to unalive himself more than once. His dad put him into therapy and he got better over time, but he still struggles with everything his mother had done to him. Jake was formally diagnosed with autism and he is on medication that keeps him functional. He's one of the bartenders at my club and we're really close friends. He's best friends with my boyfriend Kyle. Jake has a girlfriend who is one of the sweetest women I've ever met. Jake and I have a connection because we both have experienced SA from relatives and we both are stronger for having gone through that. Sorry this was so long, but he wanted his story shared with everyone. The next one is an entitled people story. Let me start by saying that I travel around a lot for work. I travel all over the world. I won't disclose the exact location this story took place due to privacy/work reasons, but let's just say I had decided to move on a whim because of an increase in crime. Now, I am only at home for about 5 to 7 months out of the year, depending on the types of assignments I need to do, so to some degree I am not really worried about crime. But there has been a major influx in robberies in the local news, and I had a $290,000 classic Ford Mustang sitting in my driveway. I was terrified that something was going to happen to it. I had it for 10 years, and it was quite literally my pride and joy, my child, if you will. So when I decided to move because of crime, it may not have been for my own safety, but rather my car's safety. Crazy what we do for the things that we love, right? Even crazier is that I thought moving into an homeowners associations would be safer. Ha ha. Boy, was I wrong. At first, it was actually quite nice. I was given a formal introduction to everyone like the board members. Unfortunately, I was not able to meet the homeowners association's president as he was traveling, but a couple of the board members said very nice things about him. I noticed 2 of the board members gave each other side-eye when the others were saying nice things about him, but I didn't really think anything of it. After all, not everyone can like each other. I soon would find out what those side-eye looks were about. I was able to meet the homeowners association's president about 2 weeks later. What is the male version of a Karen? Are they called Kyles? We'll call this guy Kyle. At first, Kyle was very polite and friendly. He wore a snazzy suit and seemed very polished and posh. I would estimate he was about 10, 15 years older than I was. He met me at my house and said he wanted to personally welcome me to the neighborhood. We were making conversation and everything was going great until I asked him if he wanted to see my car. His eyes lit up at first, and I was excited at finding a possible new friend who was just as excited about cars as I was. This quickly changed when he laid eyes on my car. It was almost an immediate switch. He went from this happy-go-lucky, posh man to someone who resembled bitterness and jealousy. And he didn't even try to hide it. It made me pretty uncomfortable, actually. He made small comments about how he can't believe someone younger than him was able to get his dream car, and how I must have cheated the system to get it. Whatever that meant, I don't really know. I do know that I worked really hard for it, and I wasn't going to let him or anyone take that away from me. I asked him to leave, very politely. It was awkward, but he left. I figured that would be the end of our issues, but guess what? I was wrong about that too. Turns out Mr. Homeowners Association's president lives on the same street as I do. Whenever I would see him for the next week or so, he would avoid eye contact with me. If I waved to him or said hi, he would completely ignore me and act like I don't exist. I also noticed more police guards in the neighborhood, which was a little concerning. However, one of my neighbors had mentioned that Kyle was an absolute prick, and actually hired these guards to patrol the neighborhood. Sometimes, when he would issue violations to people he simply didn't like, he would extort his power onto these guards and use them to get violations paid in cash or keep people locked in their house until they paid up. It sounds crazy, right? I know it does sound crazy, and I honestly didn't believe the second part until it happened to me. See, Kyle's bitterness got to the point where he started writing me fines for the dumbest things. He wrote me a violation for parking too close to my neighbor's driveway. He also wrote me another fine for my car not being parked straight in my own driveway. Is that even in homeowners associations rule? There were a lot more violations, but they're so stupid and the list got so long. I obviously didn't pay any of these. Until one day, these homeowners associations cops, or guards, or whatever they were, showed up at my house. They demanded that I pay the latest round of fines, and that because I was behind on paying them, I had to pay them in cash. I told them that I didn't have that much cash on me. I did, but still I wasn't going to pay them for these stupid things. Maybe I should have, and I would still have my OG Ford Mustang. Anyways, these guards then basically swarmed around my house. I literally could not leave my house without them harassing me, so it was basically like being on house arrest. You might be reading this and ask why I didn't call the police. Well, I'm young and dumb and assumed that Kyle had connections with the actual police, so a few days into my house arrest, they knocked on my door again and asked me if I could pay. Except this time, Kyle was with them. I told them again that no, I cannot, and to my surprise, they just walked away. I should have known it was going to be suspicious. Later that night, I woke up to a loud crashing sound, almost like a window being broken. And then I realized my car was parked right outside my window, and my heart dropped. I rushed to the window and I saw Kyle smashing all of my windows with a bat. I was heartbroken, but if I went out there, I was afraid he would hurt me too, or he would have his guards hurt me. I took a recording from my cell phone and called the cops the next morning. The cops came, and there was some confrontation between the guards and the cops, but nonetheless, I was still able to speak to the cops. I explained to them the situation and showed them the video of Kyle vandalizing my car. I also explained to them why I didn't call the cops immediately, and that I was kind of new to homeowners associations. But from what I heard, it seemed like Kyle was taking advantage of his power in the homeowners associations. Kyle ends up getting arrested, and apparently some of his little guards do too. I don't really care about them, but it was nice to know. The cops asked me if I wanted to press charges, and of course I said yes. I took Kyle to a court battle that didn't last very long, and not only did he get jail time and a permanent suspension from the homeowners associations, but he also had to pay me $200,000 in fines. I guess this kind of money is nothing to someone like Kyle, or he was tired of dealing with the whole thing because he paid immediately before he got sentenced. Not only that, but the homeowners association's board members actually raised more money for me so that I could buy a new Ford Mustang because they knew how important it was to me. So I got to keep some of the money. I spent some of it on security cameras and some on the maintenance of my new car. Wonder what Kyle is up to these days. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Let me set the scene. The year is 2017, and my family and I live in a quiet suburban street. It's mostly retired couples and some families with very young kids. Normal. Now, earlier this year, the house diagonally from us decided to move and sold it. About a day after everything's packed away, 5 cars come peeling down the street and pull into the driveway and onto the road. They're a bunch of college-age kids, so we give them some slack and let them go for a day or two. Meanwhile, day in and day out, different cars keep peeling down the street, some going over 30 miles per hour over the speed limit. This does not go over well with the neighbors, since most of the younger kids walk and ride their bikes down our street. Everyone's concerned they might hurt someone or someone's dog. Before something serious can happen, some of the neighbors who've lived here for 20-plus years go over and meet the newbies. This includes my mom. They're polite at first. They agreed to not go over 35, but more cars keep racing down the road. Along with that, they seem to be having parties every other Tuesday with about 30 cars up the street. Now the niceties are over, and the cops are called. Usually they wouldn't do this, but about 5 calls came in from a bunch of houses, and the police department was fed up. Having nothing better to do, they send one of the deputies, and they wait around the corner for a few hours a day. About 2 fines are given, and then they slow down. Except they get smart. There's only one place the deputy can hide, so they send 1 car to see if they're there. If not, they speed again. The deputy gives up after about 3 days and is gone. A few months pass, and we were at a loss for what to do. Summer is almost here, so my brother and I are outside more. We have a basketball hoop at the edge of the road right across from the house. Our driveway is at almost a 45-degree angle, and all my brother's buddies come and play, so we leave it there. There's a problem. The cars keep parking to block the hoop. My brother's pissed since that's all he used to do in the summer. He goes over to the house and the guys just shut the door on him. Now my mom's pissed. She marches over there and asks them to move their cars, sweetly, and when they refuse, she hatches a plan. That summer was a hot one, and my mom decides to cook some homemade pea soup. Now she burns this batch, by accident, of course. Instead of chucking it out, she puts it in this big plastic jar, seals the lid, and places it out on the back porch in the middle of the sun. Weeks pass, and she occasionally opens it. There are maggots squirming around, and it turned a deep brown green. There's also this clear yellow liquid that separated itself at the top. Disgusting. Meanwhile, my brother is determined to play basketball when there's a little opening. About 20 minutes in, the ball bounces onto one of the cars by accident. There was no mark, but the car alarm goes off, so he's trying to leave. I run out to see one of the regulars who lived there, a woman yelling obscenities at my brother and how he needs to pay for her car. My mother runs out after me and starts yelling at the lady to get away from my brother. There was no damage, and it was clear, but the lady kept screaming. My brother and I run inside and watch as the woman follows my mom up the driveway, waving her arms and still yelling. My mom yells for her to get off her property or she'll call the cops. By now, our older neighbors are watching, some walking over, and the lady realizes that she better leave or she might actually get in trouble. She runs across the street and slams the door. Around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday during one of their parties, my mom puts on a gas mask, My dad worked in pest control, so he had one, and takes out the soup. The stench was terrible. It was rotting meat and something indescribable. She takes the jar and goes over to the cars as quietly as possible. She dumps the rotting pea soup onto almost every car's windshield, and into that space where there are the windshield wipers. Before anything, I have to explain these were nice cars. Not sports cars, but Priuses and new cars, which don't fit with their age. The next morning, my mom is sitting in the garage, smoking a cigarette like always. It's around 6 a.m., and the lady that yelled at my brother comes out first. She's obviously tired and gets into her car. A minute or two passes, and this woman has the most disgusted face. She turns on the windshield wipers, and a hunk of rotting ham is sent flying. My mom's now in tears, and I mean tears. I wake up and head downstairs to the garage to see the woman yelling, and about 20-ish kids heading out to their cars. Each one is trashed. The cops are called, but since there's no evidence, they can't press charges against my mom. One by one, they leave in their ruined cars. They moved out 3 weeks later. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened about 10 years ago. There was a Karen who had been with the company for nearly 15 years. Her title was project manager, but she was really more of an office admin, and various internal projects would get pushed to her. These were things to help improve how the office worked, but nothing critical. One of these projects was actually deemed important, and it was reassigned to me. She hated this and stonewalled me all the time. It caused the project to be delayed, and I was getting crap from some of the executives because of this. When I commented that it was difficult to get information from Karen, she became super sweet and said she was bending over backwards to help me. I didn't understand the project, etc. I powered through anyway. But then, there was a round of layoffs, and she was one of them. Due to her time with the company, she received a 3-month severance and extended benefits. It was weird, but the company essentially cut monthly severance checks instead of paying them out all at once. But she also had to sign an NDA and non-disparagement agreement on the exit, as well as confirm that she had handed over all company materials and files. I went to grab some files related to the project, and everything was gone. Karen had deleted everything. This was before using things like Teams, Google Drive, etc. Everything was on a shared network drive, so it wasn't super easy to get the backup. But Boomer Karen was the type that used her work email for all her personal accounts, including LinkedIn. It was also company policy that the emails of departed employees would be forwarded to their department heads for a few months. Using this knowledge, I went to LinkedIn and sent a message. Hi, Karen. I heard about your departure. I hope you can use the time to take the vacation you talked about. I went to grab some of the files but noticed they were missing. Do you have backups you could share? When she responded, it also went to her old email, and thus to the department head. Don't pretend to be nice. I wouldn't be surprised if you helped me get fired. Good luck finding any of those files. I deleted everything. Screw you. Well, when that got forwarded to HR that she had put in writing that she had deleted everything, it was determined that this violated the severance agreement. All severance checks were immediately stopped. Oh, so sorry, Boomer. The next one is an entitled People Story. I thought stores would be closed or have shorter hours during the holidays. Once I got to the store, I saw that I was sadly, for the people working there, mostly wrong. But that meant I would not need to buy as much as I initially thought. I brought 3 reusable shopping bags with me, but ended up needing just one. While I can't say I have an emotional attachment to these bags, I do like them very much. I bought them because I loved the design, color, and print on them, and paid a bit more than one would when buying reusable shopping bags in a grocery store. They are nice, practical, and I like them. I finished loading my stuff onto the conveyor belt at the cash register and put the separator so that the person behind me does not waste time, but can start unloading their haul. Lastly, I put my 3 bags on top of my stuff because I had them in the shopping cart while I was picking stuff up. While I am fishing out my wallet from my purse, I catch a flash of color in my periphery. I look up and see the woman behind me reaching over and taking 2 of my bags. Confused, I stutter, "Excuse me, those are not store bags, those are my own property. Please give them back to me." Entitled woman, "I know these are not the store ones, I'm not an idiot. This store has red bags with their logo on them." Me, "Then why are you taking my property?" Entitled woman, "You don't need all of them? Your groceries will fit nicely into just that one? I need these. Mind your own business and stop making a scene." Now I'm confused and getting irritated. I'm making a scene? For confronting her politely about taking my stuff? But before I can even react, the older gentleman who was a customer before me in line and just finished paying his bill, as well as the cashier, round on this woman. Cashier. You will give her back her property or I will have security escort you out. Customer before me. How dare you behave as if you are the one being inconvenienced? You take this girl's property and tell her she does not need it and should not resist you? If you need reusable bags, just buy them for yourself. Entitled woman starts huffing and puffing. Now wait just a minute, why are you all making such a scene? Cashier all but yells, Now! I'm not negotiating or listening to you. Taking the property of others is stealing, no matter how you try to reason it. The cashier then picks up her mic and calls security to the register, looking at entitled woman sternly. Cashier, what will it be? Entitled woman gives me back my bags while mumbling something about, it's just a few worthless bags. I thank the cashier and the old man and go on my merry way. I did not do much but stand my ground, but the cashier and the old man were the MVPs. It did warm my heart that people saw something nasty and immediately jumped in to correct the foul behavior. Happy holidays, everyone. The next one is an entitled parent story. I am a 19-year-old and the second child of my parents. I have 3 brothers, aged 21, 13, and 7, and a 16-year-old sister. We grew up poor, and our parents often relied on financial help from relatives and friends to raise us. This is because even though my dad has a mediocre job and my mom doesn't work, they kept having more children. My parents are very religious and believe that children are a gift from God. Personally, I think that's total nonsense. My parents' reproductive choices wouldn't bother me if they hadn't negatively affected mine and my siblings' lives. While growing up, we never had new clothes or toys. We had to accept handouts from family members who were better off. We never went out or did anything fun. On top of that, we were well aware that the rest of the family looked down on us for constantly asking for help. Now, my older brother and I have managed to get into good colleges and are looking forward to a future that will be better than our parents. Due to the COVID-19 lockdown, we were staying at our parents' place for a while. One morning, my parents called all 5 of us into the living room. Mom said she had great news. The smile that was forming on my face quickly vanished when she said, We're pregnant. I lost my temper. I asked them how they could be so foolish and irresponsible. Don't they have enough financial troubles already without bringing another mouth to feed? My older brother tried to calm me down, but I was furious. After a lifetime of scarcity because of my parents' foolishness, they still hadn't learned their lesson. I asked them how they planned to provide for the child. My dad told me I would have to give up the money our great-uncle had left me. He had left all 5 of us some money, which we could only access when we turned 18. I said, absolutely not. That money would help pay for my college expenses. He called me selfish for not being there for the family. I told them that if they couldn't provide for the child, they should consider getting an abortion. My mom started crying and called me a heartless monster. Dad told me he was disgusted with me. I told them there was no way I was going to pay for their foolishness, and the only thing I would be willing to pay for is an abortion. What I was truly worried about was my siblings' lives getting even worse. My older brother and I have escaped our parents' grasp, but the others, especially my younger sister, will be expected to help take care of this baby. No teenager deserves to have their adolescence ruined by diapers and a screaming baby. I know what it's like because I had to go through that. It was expected of me to be an unpaid nanny to my younger brothers and sister. While my older brother could go out with his friends and have fun, I had to stay home and help give baths and feed the toddlers. I decided to involve some family members so they could talk some sense into my parents. I called my mom's maternal cousin, who is one of my favorite people. When I told her that mom and dad were having another kid, she reacted with, "What? Again?" I told her everything, including how they expected me to hand over my inheritance. She said she was going to speak to my parents and told me not to sign over anything. I promised her I wouldn't. Of course I won't. I also called 2 of my first cousins, one of whom is an accountant. I wanted her to explain to my parents how much of a financial burden this baby is going to be and try to convince them to either abort or give it up for adoption. I moved out of my parents' home a few days ago. I was only planning to stay there until the lockdown was relaxed. But I just can't bear to listen to my mom's nagging about how this baby is a blessing and that I want to kill it. I've moved into a friend's basement for a minimal rent. My mom's cousin paid them a visit about a week ago and tried to tell them they weren't doing this child any favors by bringing it into a life of poverty. My mom was very rude to my aunt and told her that a woman who chose to remain childless will never understand a mother's love. My aunt never wanted kids nor had any, which is one of the reasons she's my favorite. My dad told her to get out. My aunt told me there was nothing she could do, but she did try. I didn't blame her. The cousin tried to explain the economic impact this child would have, and my mom cried about how everyone was trying to take away her baby. What the heck? The intervention didn't accomplish anything, so now I've decided to cut contact with my parents. I just can't watch my family slide further and further into a terrible situation. I'll maintain contact with my sister, 16, just to make sure my parents can't brainwash her. My older brother will stay in touch with all of them, which is a good thing, as he can act as a link between me and the other siblings if my parents ever forbid them from talking to me. Otherwise, I'm done with these people. The next one is an entitled people story. I live in a serene countryside community where the houses are scattered far apart, offering peace and tranquility. When my wife and I bought our house 5 years ago, we were drawn to the seclusion it offered. However, as the city's population grew, more neighborhoods and communities began to emerge, including ours. The initial developments didn't bother me much. My property boasted a substantial size, complete with a private road leading to our house. I assumed there would be no issues, especially since the neighboring property, separated by a fence, was just a few feet away. The houses in our area were still adequately spaced apart, mirroring the countryside charm I fell in love with. As time passed, more houses were constructed near our property, each on its own substantial piece of land. The influx of new residents was astonishingly rapid, and it wasn't long before I noticed people taking shortcuts and trespassing on my private road. Even some of the neighborhood kids began using my field as a playground. Initially, I didn't mind. Most of the neighbors were friendly, and the children were respectful of my property. The occasional trespassing seemed harmless, as it didn't cause any damage to my house or land. However, the situation started to change when one particular neighbor began causing problems. Not only did he consistently utilize my private road as a shortcut, but he also shamelessly drove across my field. It was infuriating. No crops grew in the field, nor did I have fences, but that wasn't the point. Furthermore, this neighbor and his family frequently threw large parties, with their guests trampling over my property, using the private road, and leaving trash scattered everywhere. We tried to deter them by putting up no trespassing signs and warning signs, but my neighbor blatantly ignored them, continuing to trespass on my land. One fateful morning, after a massive party they had thrown, my wife took it upon herself to clean up the trash littering our property. While doing so, she encountered the audacity of our neighbor firsthand. He drove by in his car, using our private road, and rolled down his window to catcall her. The incident infuriated me. This once peaceful neighborhood was being tarnished by this rowdy and disrespectful individual. I was determined to confront him the following day, but he was nowhere to be found. However, he had left a mess behind, dumping tree trunks and wood on my property. Judging by his truck, he seemed to be affiliated with a logging company. My patience had worn thin. Taking matters into my own hands, I decided it was time to make a statement. I found the perfect spot next to the curved section of the private road and dug a massive hole. Fate intervened, as it rained shortly after, turning the ground muddy. Originally, my plan was to conceal the hole with plants and hope that my neighbor would stumble into it, dissuading him from using my road and property. But now, with the mud, my revenge was about to become much more satisfying. I admit it was somewhat immature, but nothing compared to the immaturity of catcalling my wife while she was cleaning up your garbage. As expected, the following day, a commotion erupted outside. My wife and I rushed to investigate. Not only had my neighbor driven his vehicle into the hole, but he was also trapped in the thick mud. In a bold move, he had the audacity to request my assistance in summoning a tow truck. Seething with anger, I agreed but decided to call the police first, informing them of his repeated trespassing on my property. Unsurprisingly, he wasn't pleased with my actions. An ongoing investigation ensued, leading to his truck being towed away, and I haven't seen it since. The consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him, and justice was being served. The incident became a turning point, ensuring that my property and privacy were respected. Update. Since the incident, my neighbor has been served with a restraining order, prohibiting him from accessing my property or using my private road. The legal proceedings shed light on his consistent disregard for boundaries, making it evident that he posed a threat not only to me, but to the entire community. The neighborhood has rallied behind me, supporting the enforcement of the restraining order and emphasizing the importance of maintaining a safe and respectful environment. With the issue resolved, The neighborhood has returned to its former tranquility. The other neighbors have expressed relief, grateful that action was taken against the disruptive individual. It serves as a reminder that boundaries must be respected, regardless of the expanding population and changing dynamics in our community. As for me, I continue to cherish the peaceful countryside setting that initially drew me to this place. My private road remains exclusive to me and my family, allowing us to savor the quiet solitude and natural beauty that surrounds our home. The next one is a pro-revenge story. At the time of this story, I was in college and had spent the last few summers and breaks working at a major car dealership. I was, and still am, obsessed with cars, and all I wanted to do was spend my days around cars and people who knew them. It was overall a great job. First, I was a washer, then a parts stock boy, detailer, delivery driver, mechanic's assistant, and then a mishmash of all the jobs at the same time since I knew the place and how things worked. This particular day, I was driving. There was one customer, Marge, who seemed perfectly fine at first. Marge and another couple had dropped their cars off very early, 7 a.m., and needed rides. The couple just wanted to get dropped at their place, which was only a few miles away, while Marge needed to go into the nearby major city for work, which was about 20 miles. Upon starting the shuttle van, I asked my usual, "What kind of music do y'all like?" Instantly, the guy from the couple says, "Oh, put it on Kate whatever. We were rocking out on the way over." Without any comment from the others in the van, I obliged. After some conversation with the couple about Springsteen and 80s rock, I dropped them off and carried on. Marge had been mostly quiet thus far, saying only where she was going and what time she needed to be picked up in the evening. Duly noted. As we got closer to her destination, she became visibly agitated, and even though I knew pretty well where I was going, she began giving me excruciatingly specific instructions as to which cars to pass, which lane to be in, how fast to go around the exit, etc. I took it in stride and easily acquiesced to her direction, despite it being more than a little condescending. This kind of micromanaging continued until we pulled up to her office building. She reiterated that exactly 5 o'clock was the time to be there, and specifically said to be in the exact parking spot I had stopped in to let her out. It was a public spot, parallel parking with no meters, so I thought it was a strange request but said okay anyway. The last thing she said before getting out of the van was, "I also absolutely hate this music." Internally I said, "Okay, you could have told me 30 minutes ago," but again played the nice driver and outwardly said, "I'll remember that." The rest of the day went by, and the last thing I had to do was get Marge from work. I stopped at the dealer to check in and had about an hour to get to Marge's office 20 miles away. I knew rush hour traffic could be bad in the city, so I left plenty early and told my manager I was heading out to be safe. Traffic was about as terrible as can be, so around 4:30 in gridlock, I called Marge's office from the van to let her know there's a chance I might be a few minutes late. She didn't answer, and it rang forever. Eventually, her cubicle neighbor picked up the phone and told me she had already left for the day. I told the guy on the phone that if he sees her, please call me. Immediately after hanging up, I called my manager and informed him of the situation. Manager: "She just called asking where you are. She said she tried calling you 3 times and got no answer." Me: "I just tried her office and someone said she already left." I checked my phone and had no missed calls, then asked, "What time did she want to be picked up again?" Manager: 5 o'clock, you still got 30 minutes, so it's alright, don't worry about it. I told my manager that if she contacts again, give her my number, again, and that I would try to call her office in 15 minutes regardless. At this point, I figured that even surface streets would get me there in time, so I exited off the highway. This was generally correct until I got downtown. I was only a couple of blocks from the office when I hit a roadblock for construction that wasn't there when I dropped her off in the morning. It was a one-way that led straight to the front of the office, so I had to figure out a way around. This was about exactly when I told my manager I would call her office, around 4:45, so I pulled over and called. This time, Marge answered, not the coworker. I informed her of the situation, and she was audibly angry. At this point, I'm still 15 minutes before our scheduled pickup time, as confirmed by her twice and my manager once, but she is obviously pissed. I played the customer is always right role on the phone, got enough information from her about the neighborhood to get around the construction, and arrived in front of her building no later than 5:02. I called again. Again, the coworker picked up and told me she had left for the second time that day. Moments later, I saw her walk out the front and go to the parking spot where I dropped her off this morning, no more than 2 spots behind me. There was no way I could have taken the same spot since there was another car in it, but the van was obviously in view with its huge dealership logo on it. It seems as though she is refusing to walk over to the van when I see her take out her phone. Expecting my phone to ring, I wait, and nothing. She seems to be looking directly straight at me and clearly aware of the van when my phone finally rings. It's my manager, saying that she is looking for me and can't find me, accusing me of being late. I step out of the van onto the sidewalk and call her name while still on the phone with my manager. She slowly wanders over without saying a word, gets into the front passenger seat of the van. Okay, then I tried to make a quip about it being 5:04, and she is just totally silent. Okay, then, let's get out of the city onto the highway. As soon as I get up to highway speeds, she flips the duck out, claiming she had heat stroke from waiting outside for so long, saying she's never seen such unprofessional behavior, claiming that I, very unspecifically, insulted her personally, and demanding to talk to my manager when we get back. Okay then. At this point, I'm oscillating between being good by the dealership versus being good to myself. At first, I decide on the former and apologize profusely. She is completely numb to anything I say, and just keeps repeating how she can't believe how horrible of a person I am. I can't even understand what she is so angry about, and so I continue to attempt to make nice. I even offered to order her office lunch the following day, to which she replied, "Nothing. There is nothing I want to hear from you. Just get me back so I can talk to your boss, and don't say anything else to me." Okay, then. A few miles down the road, she begins her micromanaging again, telling me which cars to pass, what lane to be in, how fast to drive, etc. At this point, I was still resigned to my fate of serving this woman until she made a request. "Because we're late. 4 whole ducking minutes. I need you to stop at my house. It's on the way." She directed me to her house, which, to be fair, was actually on the way. Wordlessly, she got out and went inside, only to emerge a few minutes later with a tiny little lapdog on a leash. I swear she stared me down until she was out of sight as though she was proving something, walking that ducking yipper around the block. She got into the van 4 minutes late, most of which was because she was too stupid or blind to see where I parked, but she spent 40 ducking minutes walking with that 10-pound dog while I sat there in the van like a dope waiting. Enough, I thought. I'll be a senior next fall. I don't need this crap job. She came back to the van and got in. I put on the radio station she told me she hated that morning, only this time much louder. She very angrily indicated she didn't like the music. When I didn't react, she reached and lowered the volume herself. "Oops! Steering wheel controls, idiot! It's actually louder than before. Don't like it? Why don't you try changing the channel this time?" "Oops! Now we're on the hard rock channel and somehow even louder. Change it again? Nope. Back to hard rock." Now, I want to reiterate what I said earlier, that I'm obsessed with cars, but I will clarify specifically that I have been racing since I was 10. I started with karts, moved up to shifter karts before getting my license, got into track days with my dad by 17, and had built myself a focused Auto X competitor by the time this story happened. I was known to my friends as the one who should drive if we really need a driver. It doesn't matter if you're driving a Chevy Venture minivan. Any car is capable of a lot more than the average driver thinks it is, and I was just young and stupid enough to consider proving that this day. So we set off with a goal unbeknownst to her. "You're upset about being late? Let's get you there as fast as ducking possible." With Alice in Chains blasting on the radio louder than I would ever personally care to listen to it, I'm pushing this pokey minivan harder than anyone has pushed a minivan before. It doesn't have much pickup, but on braking, there's predictable understeer, and the off-throttle weight balance makes for a nice and controllable oversteer, albeit with considerable body lean. Front-wheel drive means I can get the engine and tires to make scary-sounding noises while pulling through a corner she was already terrified upon entering. We hit an off-ramp at 80, and I late brake from the left lane into a right turn at the intersection when she grabs the door handle and screams to slow down. "Idiot, we hit that apex perfectly, don't tell me how to drive." "What? Slow down and move into which lane?" "Sorry, what I heard was, pass traffic on the shoulder at 40 and keep going despite all the gravel and debris." "Please slow down, you say? Did you mean run through the Kohl's parking lot outer connector at 50 to cut the boulevard and skip the light? Because that's what I heard. It's all for you, ma'am. Let's get you there on time." It was only about 10 miles from her house to the dealer, but I probably took 1,000 miles out of the life of those tires that day. We arrived at the dealer, and she was flustered to grossly understate the situation. I stopped in front of the service door and gave my business as usual. "Here we are, have a great day," and waited for her to get out. She was still gripping her seatbelt and slowly stammered, I need to speak with your boss, manager." Given that I already decided to quit, I responded with a tone that probably sounded more fitting to a child on Christmas and said, "Oh yes, I'll get him for you," and promptly got out of the car while she was still sitting. I jaunted inside and found my manager hanging with one of the parts department guys. All I said was, "Marge wants to see you, she's not happy," and both of them immediately burst out laughing hysterically. They laughed, and laughed for so long that I am certain it is a joke at my expense. Finally, I remind my manager that there is an angry customer and less considerately ask, "What the duck do you two think is so funny?" "That woman is terrible. She complains every single time we do anything on her car," says my manager. The parts guy says, "Last time she accused John, usual shuttle driver, 65 years old and patient as a saint, of being disrespectful and accused Greg, service advisor, of stealing from her." I wasn't really sure how to react at this point, but because she made me sit and wait 40 goddamn minutes while she walked her ducking purse dog, I had gone overtime, so I just silently went to clock out. After clocking out, I went back to the service office to eavesdrop on the conversation between her and my manager. I heard her quite honestly, and in great detail recount every traffic violation and personal indiscretion I perpetrated, only in a very disjointed and exasperated manner. My manager quietly listened to all of it, while I was around the corner wondering if I would even have a chance to put in my notice before getting fired. When she finally slowed down and gave him a chance to respond, all he said was, "Marge, it seems unusually regular that you are dissatisfied with our service. Maybe it is better for both of us if you take your car to competitor dealer next time." And with that, I turned and walked off, knowing that I had both gotten away with something awful and apparently unknowingly solved a problem for my coworkers at the same time. Because she had been such a thorn in the side of everyone in the service department, nobody even cared to look into whether there was any truth to her claims. The following morning, I put in my 2 weeks' notice with the head of the dealership. "Does it have anything to do with yesterday?" "No, I'm heading back to school in 4 weeks, and I just want a couple of weeks off beforehand." He wished me luck, and I finished out my 2 weeks without being asked to drive another customer anywhere. The next one is an entitled people story. I've been working at a department store in my hometown for 10 months, and during this time, I've encountered so many entitled people. Kens demanding their children play on the merchandise stands that break easily, and Karens demanding free gift cards. This time around, while covering an evening shift for one of my coworkers, a Karen oozing entitlement from her pores came to my register and asked about the bags. Since laws were passed, my home state banned plastic bags and instead sells fabric bags for nearly $2. That seems ridiculous to me because I see so many bags ripping so easily, but back to the story, this entitled woman said she didn't have time for talking, which I get. I mean, some people really need to buy stuff and get out. When she asked about our bag policy and how much we sell them for, I was still in a cheery mood and said, "Usually my store sells them for $2, but if you're nice to me, you can get them for free." The woman gawked at me and steam came out of her ears, not literally, in anger. I asked her if there was a problem, and she screeched, "Well, that's not nice of you. You're forcing people to be nice to you in exchange for a free bag? Are you serious, you fat cow?" For the record, I'm not a cow. I'm a short girl with curves. I wasn't going to tolerate any more mean people because I'd dealt with enough of that recently. I knew I was risking my job by being mean right back to the entitled woman, so I said, "Ma'am, I'm not a fat cow. I prefer to be called a plus-size pixie. However, I will let this slide because I want you out of the store as soon as possible. No free bags for you then. Have a nice day." I've been in customer service since my teenage years, so I've become speedy in helping customers with purchases, and I charged the woman for the bags before she left with a dagger-shooting glare. The customers in line behind her clapped for me as the woman walked away. Needless to say, they got free bags. Seriously, why do so many people forget their manners? Did quarantine over COVID-19 make everyone forget to be kind and polite? Does it kill a person to be nice or give a smile? Can someone make this make sense to me? I'd greatly appreciate it. The next one is an entitled parent story. This is about me, 28F, and my biological father. As you can tell, our relationship is strained. I seriously don't know how old my father is. I guess I could calculate it, but I just really don't want to bother. My parents divorced when I was super young, and I stayed with my grandmother and uncle, my father's youngest brother. Since I had no other male figures in my life, my uncle became dad. When I was 14, he married my mother and became my stepfather in a legal sense. But for the first 14 years, it was Grandma, Dad, and I, along with court-ordered summer holidays. Dad seriously wanted the best for me, and he thought that keeping me in contact with my father and stepmother would be the best for me. Spoiler, it was not. It really messed me up. When I took too much dinner on my plate, I had to sit and eat it all. If I did not manage, I had to wait till bedtime and then eat it for breakfast, cold. If I could not do it, lunch cold, then dinner. The most I remember was 3 days. I have IBS, so that was extra messed up. I was locked in my room for basically anything, still better than the innocent slaps. In the mornings when I awoke before them, every room other than a small guest toilet was locked. Once my stepmother took all my pocket money from me because I spent it on useless trinkets. Trust me, I did not understand. I was always told my money is mine, and I can do with it as I please. Not that I got it from them, but my pocket money was from Dad. My half-brother came into the picture when I was 6. I will never forget how I went to the bathroom in a fast food place before eating, and my brother ate my burger while I was gone. Their response? Survival of the fittest. I must have been 10, 11, and no, I did not get anything else to eat, nor was I allowed to buy myself food. While all of this is not yet entitled, I feel those incidents paint a pretty good picture of what my holidays were like. I was always happy when Dad picked me up. I was later told by Dad that my stepmother told him, "We will get her whatever it takes. She is ours." I had a very solid social worker, and Dad wanted me to be part of the decision, so it never happened. One day, around the time for pickup, Dad was late. That was on purpose. My brother was now in the picture, and my dad considered actually having me live with them. You know, a real family instead of uncle plus grandma. He changed his mind after I cried from the moment we left their driveway until we arrived home. I was so afraid he would actually leave me there. Now, because my grandmother is still alive, I tried to keep the peace and called on birthdays and stuff, and exactly that happened recently. I called my father, listened for around 30 minutes to all kinds of conspiracy crap, and how sad it is that teachers can't properly punish children anymore. I just said as little as possible. For me, the kicker came when it was time to hang up. Father, you could really call more often, not only on birthdays. Me, you know you have a phone too. Father, haha, nice try. This is your responsibility. My what now? He really thinks that. He did not even call me when I was in the hospital in February. I had to inform him. This is the second time we had the exact same conversation. It is my responsibility to keep a relationship? No, it is his privilege. That was the last call from me ever. I am not property, and I am rambling, I know. This just weighs heavy on me for all the years I spent trying. I actually have the most amazing dad in the world, and I can leave that idiot in the dust. I'm actually working on an adult adoption right now so that, should anything happen to him later in life, I am not viable for financial support, and he actually becomes my responsibility. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow. The next one is an entitled people story. I'm a 33-year-old man, leading a peaceful life with my wife and 2 kids. Our cozy house nestled in a friendly neighborhood seemed like a haven, but one neighbor cast a shadow over our happiness. John, a middle-aged man next door, had harbored an inexplicable animosity toward us since the day we moved in. Speculations about his jealousy and bitterness consumed my thoughts, for he seemed to despise his own wife and lack the joy of parenthood. Constantly prying and meddling, he intruded into our lives whenever he could. One summer afternoon, our kids were playing in our backyard, their innocent laughter filling the air. As fate would have it, their soccer ball sailed into John's yard, threatening to ignite another confrontation. Reluctantly, we let our children retrieve it, hoping for a peaceful resolution. But John, true to form, stormed out, berating them and questioning their upbringing. Alarmed, I intervened, urging my boys to head inside while I faced the venomous neighbor. Engaging in a futile apology, I requested the ball's return, seeking an end to the tense situation. Stubbornly, he refused, summoning the non-emergency police line to accuse my children of causing property damage. Frustration welled up within me as his wife, exasperated by his behavior, tossed the ball back to me, her face reddened with embarrassment. With his shouts trailing behind, I retreated to the safety of my own home, hoping for a respite from John's spite. For a while, we managed to avoid him, keeping our distance and seeking harmony within our community. Witnessing the increasing number of Ring doorbells in our neighborhood, we decided to fortify our own security. It became clear that vigilance was paramount when it came to protecting our precious children. Days passed without incident, until one fateful day when I received a notification on my phone indicating a visitor at our front door. John. Concerned, I alerted my wife, hoping she could monitor the situation through our cameras while I remained vigilant. I must mention that I possessed a shotgun solely for the purpose of self-defense. Stored securely and separate from its ammunition, it symbolized my commitment to safeguard my family. Until that night, I had never considered its practical use beyond visits to the shooting range. However, the events that unfolded would test my readiness to protect my loved ones. After a pleasant evening, my wife and I retired to bed, enveloped by the serenity of the night. Yet around 2 hours later, the sounds of shuffling downstairs jolted me from my slumber. I roused my wife, instructing her to take our children to their room and lock the door. Laden with a mix of trepidation and determination, I retrieved my shotgun, loaded it cautiously, and stealthily descended the stairs. The house cloaked in darkness, a solitary beam of light emanated from the kitchen, illuminating the figure of an intruder. Heart pounding, I trained my weapon on the individual and switched on the lights. To my shock, it was none other than John, rummaging through our cabinets, driven by some insidious compulsion. I confronted him, demanding to know why he had invaded my home. His slurred, incoherent excuses echoed through the kitchen, revealing the telltale signs of intoxication. I glanced towards the living room, observing the open window that granted him access. Refusing to yield, John brazenly proposed that I allow him to rob our house, exploiting the cover of our slumber. Appalled, I firmly rejected his outrageous request. Seizing upon this confrontation, he dialed cops, painting me as the aggressor in a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions. As we awaited the arrival of the police, my wife joined me downstairs, reassured by the distant wail of sirens that signified safety. My neighbor persisted in his deluded accusations, but I stood resolute, providing the authorities with a truthful account of events. They turned their scrutiny towards John, unraveling the sordid truth of his midnight intrusion. It became apparent that John's motives extended beyond mere theft. He sought to instill fear within us, a calculated ploy to drive us away from our cherished home. The officers questioned his audacious actions, unearthing his twisted plan to sow chaos and paranoia. I had become the target of his vendetta, a pawn in his misguided quest for control. Empowered by our shared account, the police offered me the opportunity to press charges, and I seized it without hesitation. As John was escorted outside to face the consequences of his trespasses, his wife, burdened by the weight of his actions, engaged in a conversation with the officers. We were left with an unwavering commitment to our safety, bolstering our defenses with additional security measures. The knowledge that John's actions stemmed from alcoholism added a layer of complexity to this harrowing ordeal. I couldn't help but feel empathy for his wife, who eventually made the courageous decision to file for divorce, seeking refuge from her toxic marriage. The next one is a pro-revenge story. When finishing up my degree in criminal justice, we had to learn about how the justice system works and how sometimes it doesn't. For about 2 weeks, we studied a case from the early 90s of a woman who had killed her husband. Because the case is public record and a very interesting read, look up Betty Freeburg, 1993. The setting was a small town in Iowa, and the husband was the town drunk. Everyone in town knew him as a drunk, a brawler, a womanizer, and overall just a bad person. His wife was the stay-at-home mom, as she wasn't allowed to work or leave the house aside from getting groceries. He would go home, beat her, and violate her sexually, and the cycle would go on, and the whole town knew. Neighbors were a quarter-mile down the road, but still would call the police when they heard noises. It was well documented, and because he was never a threat to their daughter, the police did nothing aside from taking him to jail like a revolving door. Each time he got out, he'd beat her up again. Their daughter was away at college but came home for Thanksgiving. While the father was at work, the daughter told the mother that her father had violated her sexually, and that she had even had an abortion because of it. This was the breaking point for the mother. She got her revenge 100-fold. When the daughter went back to school after the holidays and the husband came home, she killed him with his gun at the kitchen table. The table is important because it was a big farm table used for chopping up deer and other livestock. Doing the butchering was her job, and she was good at it. If I could find the case report, it has pictures of the table and clear marks of chopping. She chopped up her husband and scattered his body over neighboring farms, fed what she could to her livestock, and cleaned up. Months went by, and winter came and left. Police investigating his disappearance even questioned her while sitting at the table drinking coffee. She explained the marks on the table by explaining that she butchered her own meat and showed the officers her deep freeze. The investigation went on for months until finally, a neighbor's dog brought back a body part. They identified it as belonging to him, and she was arrested on the spot. She pleaded not guilty and refused any offers. It went to trial, and 12 of her peers judged her not guilty due to extenuating circumstances. She confessed to the crime, explained why she did it and how, and that she had no real choice because no one was going to help her. The farm was hers, and she refused to give it up as it had been her family's home. She was let go entirely for the murder charge. The next week we had Betty as a speaker in class to discuss the case, and she was awesome. At the time, she ironically sold dismemberment insurance for Aflac. Betty, if you ever read this, know you're seen as a figurehead for battered women, and you pulled off the best revenge I have ever been able to study. The next one is a petty revenge story. I recently bought a house and have been having some work done before I move in. It was empty on the market for about 6 or 8 months before I bought it. One morning I got a call from my contractor asking me about moving the cars in the driveway, and of course I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't moved in yet. I left my job site and drove nearly half an hour to get there. As soon as I arrived, the people on the east side of me were walking toward the cars. I asked if they were their cars, and they said yes. They told me that they had been parking there for a few months with permission from the owners. I informed them that I was the new owner and they can't park there any longer. We went back and forth, and with the intention of being a good neighbor and trying to show some goodwill, I agreed to allow them to park there for a few more weeks until I move in, with the agreement that they would move them by 6 a.m. every morning. The rest of the week went by without incident. The contractor called me about scheduling a walkthrough on Saturday, and we set a time for early afternoon. When I arrived, there were 4 cars in the driveway and nowhere to park. The only on-street parking is 2 blocks away. I called them and asked them to move their vehicles, reminding them of our agreement. After 20 minutes, they finally came out and moved them. Speaking with them, they claimed to have misunderstood and thought our agreement only referred to weekdays and not weekends. I corrected them and moved on. Sunday morning, I grabbed a trailer and loaded some furniture to take over and store in the garage. Once again, there were cars in the driveway. I called them and got VM. I texted and said they had until a tow truck could arrive to get them moved. No answer. I called a tow company. 45 minutes later, 2 tow trucks showed up, backed in, and hooked up to the cars. All of a sudden, the neighbors were home. They ran out to stop their cars from being towed, and it ended up costing them a little over $300 to get them unhooked. I called my contractor and asked if he knew someone who could put in a driveway gate, and he did. I let the neighbors know that they could no longer use my driveway. On Wednesday, I got a call from the gate installer, telling me that there were cars in the driveway. I called them and said tow trucks were on the way. They moved. The gate was installed, and I went by to pick up the opener that evening. The neighbor's husband came out to confront me, and I opted to just call the PD and deal with it legally. That Saturday, I went by to accept an outdoor furniture delivery and check on things when I noticed a towel beside the pool and a small kid's flotation device. My initial thought was that I just hadn't noticed them before, so I wrote it off and threw them both in the trash. On Saturday, the movers arrived with everything, and we began moving things in. Around 7 p.m., my daughter and I left to go grab some dinner, arriving back at the house around 9:30 p.m. The neighbors were in my pool. They were hanging out and using my furniture. When I opened the door and began raising hell, they told the kids to go to the house, and the children ran to a corner of our fence and just walked through. They had cut out the privacy fence so it could be removed and had been using the pool at their leisure for who knows how long. Again, I called the police and filed a complaint. The dad was arrested for trespassing, DPP, and an outstanding warrant, and the oldest boy, 20M, for an outstanding warrant. I replaced the fence with a new one because they had destroyed the posts, runners, and pickets by removing and reinstalling the panel. Small Claims awarded me the total cost of 83 of 8 privacy fence, which came out to $3,800. The following Monday morning around 5 a.m., their cars were parked in the street, where there's no street parking, so I made a phone call. They were gone when I left at 7 a.m. I haven't been paid yet, but I did notice a for rent sign in their yard this morning, so that's just as good. Good riddance. Edit update. 1. Security system was installed that next week, along with 6 cameras around the house, a Ring doorbell, and a fence around the pool itself to keep the dogs and my grandson out of it. I'll be closing and covering the pool in the next few weeks. 2. I met the owner of the house yesterday evening. The house will be empty by the end of the week. They were evicted for non-payment of rent. likely due to tow charges, and the husband not working because he was incarcerated, where he remains. The warrant was for back child support. The wife apologized and claimed that she was told they had permission to use the pool. They didn't. 3. The material for the fence was purchased through my company account. I'm a structural engineer and commercial construction manager for a large local GC. Only 2 posts had to be replaced and a handful of runners. The rest was just 8 1-inch x 6 inches 1/2 inches pressure-treated pickets, which cost me $2.60 per stick, multiplied by 210 pickets purchased. The rest was labor and fasteners. So altogether, about $900 for material and stain, $150 for a dumpster, and the rest went toward labor to finish it on a weekend. Fun fact, I'm also a property investor flipper. I've been in construction, commercial, civil, industrial, and residential for 35 years. Not my first fence, nor my first a-hole neighbor. Before the paint experts jump on board, I know how long I have to wait before pressure washing and staining the fence. 4. The petty was only my twisting the knife by having their cars towed from the street when they weren't affecting me at all. The next one is an entitled people story. One day my father, my cousin, and I were at a gardening store to buy some pieces to repair a sprinkler system. They were small items. We found what we needed, but one of them had the tag scratched and wouldn't scan at the checkout. I said we had to find one with a proper tag, but my father said there was no need. He took the tag off and put the item in his pocket. My cousin and I looked at each other like, what the heck? When we asked my father, he said they wouldn't even notice. Since it had no tag, it wouldn't activate the alarm at the entrance. 2 things you need to know going forward. My cousin is a police officer fresh out of the academy. My father has always had an attitude of superiority towards the children of the family. Something like, I'm your father / uncle / etc. You won't dare cross me. No matter if we're already adults with jobs and our own homes. So my cousin asked if my father realized he could have him arrested for this, to which he responded by laughing and then dared him to do it. We walked towards the registers, and while waiting in line, my cousin whispered in my ear, "You know what I'm about to do, right?" To which I replied, "Yes." He waited for my father to pay for the stuff he wanted to buy and pass the alarm sensors so that the theft would be official and not just intent. Then he started acting like a police officer. He identified himself as an off-duty police officer, mentioning his badge number, etc., loudly and clearly so that people would hear. Then he asked my dad to empty his pockets. My dad had a puzzled look on his face at this point. Security came to check what was going on, and my cousin explained that he, as an off-duty officer, had witnessed this man putting an object in his pocket and not paying for it. Security also asked my dad to empty his pockets, and there it was, the item he had stolen. Security detained my dad and called cops. Police officers arrived and took my dad away after confirming the story with the security footage. He spent the night in jail and was fined. After that, he stopped acting like the king of the family's hill, and this became something to laugh about for years to come. The next one is an entitled parent's story. Well, I think it's fairly safe to assume I've lost a couple of friends over this, but it wasn't me who did it. This weekend, a friend of mine asked me to keep an eye on her 2 kids while she and her hubby went away for the weekend for some couple time. Her mother was initially going to watch the kids but fell through on short notice. She called me at 3 p.m. on Friday to come over in 3 hours, and my friend knew I probably wasn't doing anything, which was both hurtful and accurate. I said sure. She's got 2 kids, a girl who is 8 and a boy who is 5. They're good kids for the most part. The boy has a little bit of a snitching problem and the girl has a sharing problem, but it's 2 days. So I show up Friday after work while my friend gives me the rundown, and her husband tells the kids he will beat them with their sibling if they're bad. The kids were unimpressed. The parents leave, and it's just me and the kids in the house, and it's immediate pandemonium. The brother snitches on his sister for taking an extra cookie. The sister cries to me that her brother touched her switch, and I make the executive decision that they've got too much energy, and if they're tuckered out, they'll hopefully chill. So I asked the kids to track down bathing suits because we're going to my gym, which has a pool and a guest policy. I did let Mom know what we were up to before we left and asked if it was okay if I brought my dog over. He doesn't shed and is house trained. She said that was fine. Operation Pool was a great success, though the locker room got a bit dicey. That's a whole other story. Once everyone was appropriately tired, including me, we made a pit stop on the way back to their house to grab my pooch. He's extremely well behaved and loves kids, and both kids were immediately all about Dexter, and Dexter was all about the kids. Ground rules, no pulling on his fur, and he goes where he wants. Kids kind of struggle with the notion that a dog is not a toy. I obviously kept him out of places where he wasn't supposed to go, but I'm a grown up, allegedly. Miraculously, after the swim and chasing the dog around the house, left the kids too pooped to pop, and both fell asleep watching a Disney film on the TV. After the movie, I woke the kids up to trot off to bed and didn't make them brush their teeth. For the record, the son did indeed yeet me under a bus when Mommy called in the morning. I told the kiddos that if they left their doors open, Dexter might sneak in and give them cuddles. I increased the likelihood of this by sleeping on the couch and not leaving him a spot. He expressed his displeasure with me by flouncing off and going into the boys' room to sleep. Great success. Saturday, we went for a hike in the morning, had a nap, and then played ball with the dog and generally had a pretty chill day. Diffused the sharing issue by explaining to the girl that the pup has feelings and wants just like any person, and she can't control him that way. She appeared thoughtful, and then immediately started yelling at her brother for hogging the dog again. At least she wasn't mad at the dog. I successfully heated up the casserole Mom had left me for dinner, following her carefully laid out instructions, admonished the kids to not give him people food, and was soundly ignored. I did draw the line at a couple of morsels from each kid and put my foot down. More than that, and he's gonna get the runs, and nobody wants that. That night, I made sure Sis got a turn by again, hogging the couch and also closing the boy's door since he got a turn already. The girl was smug. The boy made me call his mom. Mom wasn't happy that my dog was in her kids' beds. I reminded her that he doesn't shed and can't smell worse than the kids, and her daughter might burn the house down with us inside if she doesn't get a turn. Mom accepted defeat. Saturday night was again relatively peaceful, though toothbrushing did happen. Early Sunday morning, I got woken up by having my dog step on my testicles, which is a thing he's really good at, and he was mad at me for not leaving any room. I made room. Apparently, the girl tried to do something he didn't like, and he noped out of there. She wasn't happy about that, but was appeased by my pain enough to go back to bed. This morning was relatively chill, some more playing with the dog and some team tug of war, and Mom and Dad got back around lunchtime and thanked me for keeping their kids in one piece. The kids said bye to the pup, and there were tears, and I loaded up myself and my dog and went back home to enjoy the relative peace and quiet. Yeah, I wish it ended there. Maybe an hour after we got home, I get a phone call from a very frazzled-sounding mom with kids crying in the background. She says they need my dog now. I'm sorry, what? You don't need a dog, you need my dog? Like I don't need to come back and visit soon? You just want him? Well, the kids got so attached and they won't stop crying about missing the dog, and her husband don't have time for 2 kids and a puppy, and more guilt-inducing word vomit that was having precisely zero effect on me. Abso-fluffing-lutely not. Click. Still getting texts about being reasonable and you have time to train a new dog. 48 hours of free babysitting isn't enough? You want my dog too? Not in this lifetime. The next one is an entitled parent story. So basically I, 15F, and my ex, 15M, broke up a little over a month ago. In the first couple of weeks, my friends were comforting me. For some background, he was manipulative and forced me to do things I didn't want to do, like sending photos, etc. It took me over 2 months to finally break up with him. As I said before, in the first couple of weeks after the breakup, I was just being comforted. Then after that, his mother started sending me harassing messages and voicemails. It was mild at first. I never answered their calls because I was scared of his mother. Her son was one of those boys who always acted differently in front of certain people, and I was stupid enough to not see that this was a very red flag. Anyway, his mother obviously thinks he is an angel sent from heaven who can do no wrong, so when I told her about what he did to me, she lost her head. She started spam calling and spam texting me. As a teenager, I was very afraid, so I shut my phone off and decided to just leave it for a bit and hope things would die down. The next morning, when I checked my phone, I had 100 plus text messages and 35 missed calls. I checked through all of them. The texts were, of course, typical, "How dare you? My child is an angel. He would never do that to anyone," cursing me out and all that stuff. But the voicemails were more vulgar. She said that she was going to find where I lived and hurt me. In one of the voicemails, I will never forget what she said. "You, young lady, are a very spoiled brat. You are just sad that you can't get my son to send to you, so you're making all of these lies and fibs up so that you can gain some sort of dominance. You will never, and I mean never, have any man in your life ever again because of this. I hope that you end up lonely and miserable because that is all you ever will be." and then it ended with some rustling and muffled yelling before it beeped. But at that point, I was having a panic attack and couldn't breathe. That was a couple of days ago. Of course, he hasn't and won't tell his mother the truth so he can keep his angelic image. But lately, he has been texting me and saying that I should drop all of this because his mother won't stop yelling at him to call me or text me. My friends tell me that I shouldn't because I'm not in the wrong, but I think I am. So am I the a-hole? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.